everybody. I'm Brittany Lewis, a breaking news reporter here at Forbes. Joining me once again is Congresswoman Debbie Wasserman Schultz. Congresswoman, thanks so much for coming back on.
Thanks for having me as always, Brittany. Happy New Year.
Happy New Year to you as well. And this new year really the news couldn't have been crazier. Over the weekend, there was an operation, U.S. forces led an operation that led to the capture of Venezuelan leader Nicolás Maduro. And all members of the House were briefed yesterday on it by members of the Trump administration. And I do know that briefing was classified, but you can't tell us much probably from what you learned there because it was classified. But what questions did you have when you left the meeting?
Well, I appreciate the opportunity to talk with you about the concerns that I have following my initial sharing of the elation of my Venezuelan constituents. I expressed support for the action that arrested Maduro, brought him to the United States for accountability, and continue to believe that was the right move. He not only was a narco-terrorist, but he committed crimes against humanity, and we need to make sure that that accountability is real. Unfortunately, my optimism and elation alongside my constituents has started to abate in the days after the capture of Maduro, and that is because there appears to be it appears that there was a tremendous amount of military and intelligence preparation, in an exquisite sense. And we were briefed about that yesterday, more than we had been. Congress was left out of this process, and that we have the constitutional authority to declare war. This was a major military operation. But what is baffling to me is how it was possible that all that planning to capture Maduro occurred, but there appears to have been no plan for the day after. Essentially, we are propping up the cronies of Maduro who helped him oppress the Venezuelan people and engaged in the same narco-terrorism in the regime. The regime remains in charge. I know Donald Trump says he's in charge, and the Secretary of State has indicated that tremendous pressure and leverage is something that we're going to exact to ensure change comes in Venezuela. But there are really no details about that. And even President Trump yesterday said, we will likely be in Venezuela for a long time. That is not what the American people signed up for.
I want to talk about President Trump and the Trump administration's plans, but first, I spoke with one of your colleagues, Congresswoman Mariannette Miller-Meeks, yesterday after the meeting, and she told me she left feeling reassured that there aren't going to be U.S. boots on the ground there. And I know that the Trump administration has characterized that Operation Absolute Resolve as a law enforcement function. But based on what you're saying, you said it was a large-scale military operation. Do you think that there's going to be war? Is this the start of war? Can you definitively say it's not?
Well, I'm not sure how my colleague, Congresswoman Miller-Meeks, came away with that assumption, because that's not what was said. There was no assurance given that we wouldn't have boots on the ground. Donald Trump, since the capture of Maduro, has clearly said that has clearly threatened a second wave if they don't cooperate. My deep concern is that there has been not only no progress for Venezuelans and no light at the end of the tunnel for that progress, but political prisoners hasn't been released. We asked questions yesterday. I asked questions about the timeline for release of political prisoners, for the transition to democracy, even establishing, an outline as to how that will occur. And we have the regime led by Delcy Rodriguez, who has now passed a law and a decree that is cracking down on Venezuelans, searching their cars, searching their cell phones, and trying to make sure that they can hold accountable people who they believe supported the capture of Maduro or are promoting it. That's making life seems to have gotten worse, not better, for Venezuelans.
Delcy Rodriguez, who was Maduro's vice president, is now the interim president of Venezuela. Is this going to be the same regime as Maduro's regime, just with a new face on there? I mean, is the Trump administration, are they saying we're committed to helping Venezuela transition to democracy? Are they saying that privately?
They don't say that privately, and they don't say it publicly. Donald Trump has not said the word democracy, has not mentioned Edmundo Gonzalez, the rightful president of Venezuela, or and dismissed Maria Corina Machado, the leader of the opposition. The only thing that Donald Trump has said has focused on the oil reserves that they have and our control over them, and that the tremendous leverage we have, and Secretary Rubio had talked about this publicly, the tremendous leverage that they believe we have because we are blockading their oil. There is my deep concern with Donald Trump saying that we could be there for a long time is that they are going to try to use whatever leverage they believe they have over the remaining regime leaders that they now have recognized. They're actually in the process of opening an embassy in Caracas. I mean, so they're going to reestablish formal relations with a country that is still led by a narco-terrorist regime, one of whose leaders, Diodatos, is actually under indictment himself and has a $25 million bounty on his head from the United States. Where is the progress and the possibility of liberty and freedom and prosperity for Venezuelans? All I see is the opportunity that Trump appears to have believed exists to control their oil.
I'm curious what the justification is that the Trump administration is saying to Congress about working with Delcy Rodriguez, because she was sanctioned by the United States. And Speaker Mike Johnson said this isn't about regime change. This is about a change of behavior and regime. What is the United States doing to make sure that there's a change of behavior here?
That is what I want to know. I have yet to see any details about a possible change in behavior, the treatment of Venezuelans, the oppression and repression ceasing, the release of political prisoners. What I have said a couple of times over the last few days is that right now it appears that we have cut off the head of the snake, only to replace it with a different head on the same snake. And I mean, the regime leadership, again, one of whom is under U.S. indictment with a $25 million bounty on his head, cannot remain in place over the long term. Why would we be there for a long time, as President Trump is saying, if we are going to try to establish a transition to democracy? This is for the Venezuelan community that I represent. I know that they are still hopeful. They're remaining cautiously optimistic. I want to believe that a process will be detailed, but when I asked questions yesterday, there were no details outlined, no timeline for a transition process to occur. And I don't know how they could have gone into so much excruciating planning for the operation to remove him without also planning, at least in broad strokes and specific outlines, to have a day after process. I just don't get it.
We're a years after process, really, because President Trump, he told the New York Times yesterday that the United States could oversee the government in Venezuela for years. And Secretary of State Marco Rubio, he outlined this 3-step process in Venezuela. The first step was being stabilization for the country. That includes controlling the sale of up to 50 million barrels of oil. And President Trump posted about this step on Truth Social. He said, "This oil will be sold at its market price, and that money will be controlled by me as President of the United States of America to ensure it is used to benefit the people of Venezuela and the United States." Is there any clarity on how that money is going to be handled or how that money is going to be split by the United States and Venezuela?
No, questions were asked about that, reference to the money that would be available through the sale, the market sale of that oil, and no specific answers were given. The authority, the question arises, where does the administration have the authority to engage in that sale, to decide what is done with the money? I mean, it is Congress that controls the funding that is within the United States purview, not the executive branch. And I mean, there have been references to holding the oil in accounts offshore. The answers we got yesterday were vague, without detail. It feels like a they used chalk to write out the outline of these phases with an eraser, very nearby.
And this feels like just such a simple question that I'm about to ask you, but I've got asked this question a lot. Why or how does the United States think that they're just entitled to this oil? I mean, what is the justification here?
Well, that's a good question, and we have a need for answers to that question. But we do obviously have American interests in that oil because Citgo and Citgo is a Venezuelan oil company, but we have American-based contracts. They have violated and not paid billions of dollars in those contracts. So there is American financial interest there. But I mean, the shifting sands of the purpose of this operation have really been disturbing. I mean, first it was about the narco-terrorism and the drugs supposedly flowing into the United States, not fentanyl, which comes from Mexico, but cocaine. Now it's about oil. There's no mention of it being about democracy and freedom. And we should not be signing up to run Venezuela for years. And what are we going to do? Leave a blockade in place for a decade or more? This cannot be a long-term operation. We have the ability to make plans to help them transition to democracy. They have leaders that were rightfully elected, or we can establish a process for new elections there where all candidates can have an opportunity to run, and they can elect new administration, and we can help them ensure the safety and security of that. But to be in this vague situation that right now only appears to be about oil and benefiting from its revenue is not something that's appropriate, and that is where Congress needs to be involved in as a co-equal branch of government and the constitutional authority on military action.
Congresswoman, we have to end it there, but I appreciate your time per usual. Thank you so much. You're welcome back anytime.
Thank you.